There are moments in MotoGP when one rider does not need to set the fastest lap to make the entire paddock nervous. Marc Márquez rolled out onto the track, and suddenly the session felt different. Not because he was desperate, not because he was throwing the bike around like a man with nothing to lose, but because he looked calm, too calm. The kind of calm that makes rivals wonder what is really coming next. He had speed underneath him. He had another rider close by. He had the chance to push. Then Marc backed down. At first, it looked like he gave the lap away. A strange decision, a missed opportunity, maybe even a sign that he had finally learned to control the fire that once made him the most feared rider in the sport. But with Marc Márquez, nothing was ever that simple. Because this was not just another practice session. This was a test for Ducati, a test for the rest of the grid, and maybe most of all, a test for Marc himself. For a long time, people kept saying the same thing. Do not judge him yet. Do not judge the bike yet. Do not judge Ducati and Marc Márquez until he is somewhere close to full fitness. Well now, that moment is starting to arrive, and that is what makes this so dangerous. Because the Marc Márquez standing in front of MotoGP now is not the same broken man who was once fighting just to survive the weekend. This is not a rider buried by pain. This is not a champion fading quietly into the background. This is Marc Márquez beginning to look like Marc Márquez again. And when that happens, the entire sport changes. Last time out, he showed dominance. Not a small flash, not a lucky moment, but the kind of performance that reminds everyone why his name still carries fear. And now, as the clock started to run down, the pressure around him began to explode. Jorge Martin was trapped down in 12th, a world champion fighting from the wrong side of the leaderboard. Fabio Di Giannantonio was pushing to protect his place inside Q2. Jack Miller was in the traffic. Toprak Razgatlioglu, the former world superbike star, was right there in the same fight. Every rider was searching for one perfect lap. Every tenth of a second mattered. Every mistake could destroy the weekend before qualifying even began. But through all that chaos, Marc Márquez remained the name everyone was watching. Because when Marc is near the front, it is never just about the lap time. It is about the message. It is about the feeling that he sends through the grid. The feeling that the old danger is coming back. The feeling that if he is healthy, if the Ducati is working, and if his confidence is returning, then MotoGP may be facing a problem much bigger than one fast Friday lap. So the question was no longer simple. It was not just, can Marc Márquez make it into Q2? The real question was much darker. Was he holding back because he had nothing more? Or was Marc Márquez waiting because the attack had not even started yet? The fight was no longer about finding speed. It was about surviving a storm that was building around Marc Márquez. For most of the session, Marc had been one of the names everyone measured themselves against. His lap time was not just a number on the screen. It was the target, the line every other rider had to cross if they wanted to prove they belonged at the front. And then Fabio Di Giannantonio attacked. He was not riding like a man trying to stay comfortable. He was riding like a man trying to erase any doubt before the final minutes became dangerous. The pressure was rising. The track was full. Riders were looking for space. One small mistake in traffic could ruin the lap before it even began. Jack Miller was ahead. Other riders were moving through their own programs. And Di Giannantonio had no room for hesitation. He needed one clean run, one perfect final second, one lap strong enough to take the fight directly to Marc Márquez. And somehow, he found it. Through the final part of the lap, Di Giannantonio carried the speed. He kept the bike alive. He kept the lap together. And when he crossed the line, he went to the top. Marc Márquez had been beaten, not by a huge margin, not by dominance, but by the kind of tiny difference that makes MotoGP brutal. Less than a blink, less than a heartbeat. That was all separating the riders at the front. Marc was still right there, still dangerous, still close enough to strike back. But now the story had changed, because when one rider takes the top spot away from Marquez, everyone else starts to believe they can do it too. And that is when Marco Bezzecchi. He was not just improving, he was flying. By the halfway point of the lap, Bezzecchi was already up on the top. The Aprilia looked sharp underneath him, agile through the corners. fast in the sections where direction change happened. This was the part of the track where the bike would come alive. Bezzecchi used every inch of it. Suddenly, Di Giannantonio's lap was under threat. Marc's position was under threat. The entire top order was under attack. Bezzecchi was not chasing a safe time. He was chasing something bigger. A lap that could break open the session. A lap that could push the pace into another level. Behind that battle, another story was turning desperate. Jorge Martin was fighting just to get inside the top 10. For Marc Márquez, this was a fight near the front. For Martin, it was a fight against the edge. If he missed the top 10, he would be dragged into Q1. And in MotoGP, Q1 is not just another session. It is a trap. It adds pressure. It adds risk. It gives rivals another chance to attack. And Martin knew he had to escape it, so he pushed hard through the final corners. The Aprilia was moving underneath him. He was wrestling the bike, shoulder down, body hanging off the machine. Every corner looked like a warning. Every exit looked like it could go wrong. But Martin kept it together. He crossed the line. And for a moment, he was inside the top 10, overturned. But only for a moment, because this session was moving too fast for anyone to feel safe. A lap that looked strong 1 second could become weak the next. A rider who looked secure could be pushed down before the cameras even moved away. And that was exactly what happened. Martin climbed into the top 10. Then he dropped. Another rider improved. Then another throw. The safety margin was almost nothing. Just a few thousandths. Just a tiny piece of time standing between survival and disaster. Meanwhile, Marc Márquez remained in the middle of the storm. He was no longer alone at the sharp end. Di Giannantonio had already taken a shot at him. Bezzecchi was charging. Martin was fighting like his weekend depended on it. The timing screens were lighting up red. Every sector brought a new warning. Every lap threatened to rewrite the order. This was no longer a normal Friday fight. This was a battle where the fastest men in the world were being separated by almost nothing. And that made Marc's position even more important. Because if Marquez could stay calm in this chaos, if he could remain near the front while everyone else was throwing everything at the clock, then it would say something much bigger than one lap time. It would say the danger was real. It would say Marc Márquez was not just back in the conversation. He was still one of the men every rider had to go through. But the fight was not finished. The lap times were still falling. The pressure was still rising. And the next attack was about to change everything. But there is one detail almost everyone is missing. This was not just a fight for lap time. It was a fight for control. And in the middle of that pressure, Marc Márquez was still the reference point. He was not leading every moment. He was not destroying the field, but he was close enough to the front to make every other rider feel the pressure. Because when Marc was near the top, the standard changes. Suddenly, a good lap is not enough. A safe lap is not enough. You need something special, and that is exactly where Jorge Martin found himself. In simple terms, the top 10 meant safety. Outside the top 10 meant Q1. And Q1 in MotoGP is dangerous. Not because the riders are slow, but because everyone is desperate. There is more traffic, less clean air, more pressure. And one mistake can turn a difficult weekend into a disaster. Martin was sitting right on the edge. For a moment, he had done enough. He pushed the Aprilia hard. He fought through the final corners, and he dragged himself back into the top 10. But the problem was, the session was still alive. Other riders were still improving. And then Ogura changed everything. His lap was not just fast. It was calm, clean, and perfectly timed. From a racing perspective, that may suggest his bike was working beautifully through the final sector. He could brake, turn, pick up the throttle, and carry speed without making the bike go out of control. That is what made the lap so dangerous. Ogura did not just beat the clock. He raised the level of the entire session. Then Mir crashed at turn 7, and that changed the rhythm again. A late crash can bring out yellow flags, and yellow flags can kill the final laps of riders who are still trying to improve. That is the cruel part of MotoGP. Sometimes your result is not only decided by your own speed, it is decided by timing, traffic, flags, and whether the track gives you one last chance. For Martin, the timing could not have been worse. While the order kept changing, Diego Moreira moved up, Raúl Fernandez stayed inside the fight, and Martin was pushed back out of the top 10. This could mean that Martin's biggest problem was not only pace, it was the moment he needed the pace. He needed a perfect lap at the exact time when the session was becoming more chaotic. That is a brutal place to be, because when you are outside the top 10 with one final chance left, you cannot ride with comfort. You brake deeper, you lean harder, you risk the track limits. Every corner becomes a gamble, and every small mistake costs everything. But for Marc Márquez, the message was different. While others were fighting just to survive, Marc was still near the front, still calm, still fast, still dangerous. And that may be the most important sign of all, because in MotoGP, pure speed is scary, but control under pressure is even scarier. And if Marc Márquez can stay composed while the rest of the grid is fighting chaos, then the real battle may not have even started yet. This was the moment Jorge Martin had to become perfect. No room left, no safety net, no second chance. He had one final lap to escape Q1, and everything was already working against him. Bezzecchi moved aside, the track opened, the pressure hit, and Martin attacked. Into the stadium section, he powered toward turn 7, the same corner where Joan Mir had already gone down. That detail mattered, because at this point in the session, every rider near the wrist pushed too little, and the lap is gone. Push too hard, and the weekend can fall apart in the gravel. Martin had no choice. He had to go all in, but almost immediately the lap started slipping away. A quarter of a second lost in the first sector, then 4/10 by the middle of the lap. And in a session this tight, 4/10 felt like a lifetime. Still, Martin kept fighting. He leaned the Aprilia to the edge. He pushed toward the limit of the track. He tried to take time in places where there was almost nothing left to take. Every corner looked desperate. Every exit looked risky. And for a moment, it felt like he was trying to force the bike to give him something it did not have. That is the cruel truth of MotoGP. Effort is not enough. Courage is not enough. Even being a world champion is not enough. At this level, you need precision. You need timing. You need the perfect lap at the perfect moment. And this time, Martin did not get it. The lap was not enough. Jorge Martin was out of the top 10. For only the second time in 2026, he would have to go through Q1, and that changed everything, because Q1 is not just another qualifying session. It is a battlefield before the real battle. More traffic, more pressure, more risk, and only a small window to escape. One mistake there can damage the entire weekend. One blocked lap can destroy your chance before qualifying even truly begins. That is why this moment matters so much. Martin did not simply lose a position. He lost control of his Saturday. And while Martin was falling into danger, the front of the field was moving at a terrifying level. Ogura delivered a stunning lap. Fabio Di Giannantonio was right there. Marco Bezzecchi looked dangerous. Pecco Bagnaia was inside the fight. Pedro Acosta was pushing. Joan Mir stayed in the top 10 despite his crash. And Marc Márquez remained exactly where rivals do not want him to be. Near the front, calm, fast, dangerous. That is the bigger message of this session. MotoGP is no longer giving anyone breathing room. Not rookies, not race winners, not even world champions. The pace has become so extreme that one small mistake, one bad second, or one mistimed lap can throw a rider straight into trouble. The most important part is not what happened today. It is what this does to tomorrow. Martin now has to fight through Q1, where he cannot afford patience. Ogura suddenly looks like one of the biggest surprises of the weekend, and Marc Márquez is still sitting inside the danger zone for everyone else, not because he is in trouble, but because he is close enough to strike. That is what makes Marc different in this story. He does not need to dominate every second to create fear. He only needs to stay there, close, controlled, waiting for the moment when everyone else starts to crack. The real question begins now. Was this just one brutal Friday session Or did it reveal something much bigger about the balance of power in MotoGP? Did this moment change the course of the season? And if Marc Márquez is already this calm while others are fighting chaos, what happens when he decides to attack? Tell me what you think in the comments. Was this brilliant pressure from the field? Or did Jorge Martin simply take the risk too far? Subscribe for more MotoGP stories told like battles, and share this video with another racing fan who needs to see what really happened.